Hello and welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to be showing how to build a React app, and I'm going to show how to actually build the components and design the components and to actually plan out the component structure beforehand. And while for this project it's a relatively simple one, it's still going to be good practice to know for the long term. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a Tic Tac Toe game in React. And I'll just show you the basic functionality of a Tic Tac Toe, right? So pretty much what you want is you want a 3x3 grid where you can put in X's and O's. And I'm not going to focus too much on styling here. It's more going to be on how to design a React app, right? And so you can put X's and O's, and if there's a winner, it should be shown. And then something simple like play another game button appears after someone won, and it lets you play another game. Also, let's say there is a tie. So hopefully I can make a tie. I think, okay. So if in the case of a tie, you want to be able to play another game as well, right? So that's the basic functionality. You can click on squares, and once you clicked on a square, you shouldn't be able to click on it again, right? Like in a normal tic-tac-toe game. We don't need to display the score or anything, or like have some kind of like, this is more just how to design React components. So let's get started. And first, what you want to do is you actually want to draw out your components. You want to have a plan ahead of time, and you want to figure out exactly what you're going to have in each component and your component hierarchy. So what we're going to want to have here is notice, and we're going to go back and forth to our picture. So notice our main component here needs to have a box. It needs to have some kind of a header that tells you who's a winner, and then it needs to have this play another game button. So we're going to be actually checking for the winner and doing this in our main like top level component. So we need some kind of top level component that contains these things, right? A header, a box, and a play another game button. So let's do that first. And we're going to actually write these things, right? So we're going to need a header to display the winner. Then we need a box, which we're actually going to make another component here, which will be the box. So this will be the box, like the tic-tac-toe box. And finally, at the bottom, we're going to have a button to display winner that should be conditionally rendered when there is a tie or a winner, right? Or not to display the winner, I guess the button to play again. And like I said, I'm not going to focus too much on like perfect styling, more just React design. And so in this box, we have a 3x3 grid essentially, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to have in this box, I'm going to have 3 row components. So I'm going to have 3 rows in here. And I'm going to say 3 rows. And that will be, the row will be the row for the box, right? So we're going to have 3 of them. So let's just say like we can do it like this. And instead of this, let's actually just maybe draw out our rows, right? So it's going to be like, let's think about this actually. Let's go back actually. I think what we want to do is in this box, we're actually going to show the 3 rows as individual components like this. So we're going to have row, and then we're going to have 3 of these essentially. So row, row, just like this, right? We're going to have 3 rows, and these are all going to be row components, and a row will just be, you know, a row of the box, row, row, something like this. And in each row, we're going to have 3 squares, right? So we're going to have 3 squares. That's going to look something like this. So, and all of these are components. And you don't always have to draw out like your entire components. But in this case, because it's kind of small, we're going to have it like this, right? So square, then another square, and finally one last square here. And it's a little disorganized, but that's okay. Essentially, we're going to have 3 of these. So we're going to have one here and one here for our squares, and then we can just like paste them here. Something like this. Square, square, square. Okay, and this is going to be our pretty much our design here. So we're going to have it like this. And there we go. And as far as functionality, so this is what our entire like tic-tac-toe is going to look like, right? We're going to have this header, and this is going to be, let's actually maybe number these components as well, right? So this is going to be the app. This is going to be the board component. Then we have a row component. And then finally, in each of these, we're going to have a square. So a little disorganized, but that's okay. So something like this. This is all the components we're going to need. And essentially what needs to happen is, in the app, we need to check for a winner. And we also need to hold the state of, like, is each one of these squares a X or a circle or a null, right? Because if you look at the game, if you start, they start at null. So essentially, for the app, we can actually do this on the side, like what we need, what states we need in it. This is for our design, right? So we're going to draw another thing over here, and we're going to write in the app, what things do we need? Like, what states do we need? So we need a state that is some kind of array, right? Array of the values of each square, right? We need something like that. And then we also need a state that, it's not really a state, actually. It's going to be like a function. So we need a function to, or actually, we do need one more state, right? So when you click, right? When you click, you need to be able to know, like, should this click produce an X or a circle? So we need a state for that as well, right? So we need a state that is an array of the value of each square. We also need a state that is what the next click should provide, right? Is it an X or a circle? Okay. And we also need a function in this. So we need a function. And the way we're going to do this is it's going to take two values. It's going to take a row and a column, and it will set the appropriate box or the appropriate square to that, right? So essentially, like, what happens is if they click here, this will be in the square itself. We need to call some kind of function that will tell it, okay, what's the row and the column for the square? And then it will set that square to that value. So we need something like that. What else do we need here? So we probably also need a function to check for the winner, right? So we need a function to check for the winner. Now, so best practices in React, I wanted to talk about some of those because we're actually, like, learning how to build a React app, not like Tic Tac Toe game, is you want to minimize your states. So any state that can be calculated from some other states shouldn't be a state variable. So for example, let's say we have a state of, like, the values, and we have a state of this. We can calculate the winner based on the state of the values, right? Like, we can simply check that. So winner shouldn't be a state, but the square should be a state. We can't, like, calculate the squares from something else. We have to have that somewhere, right? So we need a function to check for the winner, and then finally, I guess what other stuff do we kind of need? So we also need that button to display. So we need button to display conditionally, maybe, if there is a winner, right? Something like that. Just broad strokes. Okay. Now, in the button, or in the app, we're going to have a board. So the other thing is, we need to figure out what props we want to pass down to the board. And when we render the board, so we're just going to write board in here in this app, what props do we want to put into it? Well, we want to probably give it the state, right? That is the array of the values of each square. That's probably going to be good information, right? So we want to give it the squares because we want to, like, display that in the lower components. And then we also probably want to give it this function. We don't need to give it the function to check for the winner, but what we do need to do is we need to actually set the appropriate square, right? So anytime something gets clicked on, we do need to, like, set the appropriate square. So we need to pass this down, function, and we'll just call this, like, maybe set square or something, function or something like that. And that's pretty much all we need to give to the board, right? So when a square gets clicked on, it will get called. Okay, so now let's go to the board and let's think about what state we need for the board. So for the board, we're actually just going to be displaying rows, right? In the board, there's going to be rows, and in the rows, there's going to be squares. So for the board, we don't actually need to have any individual state. We're just going to use the props So we're not going to have any states unique to the board in here, but what we do need to do is we need to actually render the rows. So what props do we need to pass down to the rows? And so the way this is going to work is we're actually going to write this down in the rows. We need to probably pass down like a row index, right? Because this function that changes the squares takes a row and a column. So we're going to pass down row index, and we're also going to pass down the set squares function, right? So we're going to prop drill the set squares function. And that's pretty much it for that one. Now we need to be looking at the row. So as you can see, let's go back to this picture. So the row should just have 3 squares in it. So the row, once again, isn't going to have its own state, but when you call the squares, you're going to need to pass down the row index and then maybe like a column index for the square, right? So then we can call set square in the square, and it will have a row and a column. So we can have a row index, call index, and set square again. So something like that. And finally, in the actual square itself, so we need to, it's not going to have a state again, but we need to actually display the square that is being passed into here. So we can write that down maybe like display X or circle, depending on what was passed into it. And so actually, I guess we forgot one more thing, as you can see. So we forgot one more thing that we need to be passing down. We need to be actually passing down like the appropriate part of the squares array to be displaying, right? That we never did. We passed down a row index and the set square that updates, but we never actually passed this squares. So we need to pass down the appropriate part of the squares to display. And similarly, when we pass down to the square, we're not going to pass down the squares array, but just one value square to display. And so this is going to display X or 0 based on prop. And then when clicked on, call set squares with the row and the column, right? Something like that, essentially. So you're essentially just prop drilling down, and then when you click on the square, you want to call the row and the column. And so typically in React, what you want to do is you want to have your like set functions as far down as possible while still maintaining functionality. So in this case, because we have to actually like show the winner and have a button in our app, that means we want to do that in the app, right? Because the app is going to have this like board button in the header. But if we didn't, let's say we didn't have a button to play again, or a header to display winner, or even check for a winner, then we could just have this state in the board. So you want to have the states as far down as possible, because then you minimize prop drilling. But in this case, this is as far down as possible, because we are going to be checking for a winner and having this button and things like that. Okay. And so we want to display the X or circle based on the prop when clicked on, call set squares with that appropriately. And I think for the most part, that should be it. So now we should be ready to actually make our React app. And let's just go over it one more time. So essentially we have an app. It's going to have a header to display the winner, and it's going to have states. That's going to be the array of squares, and the next thing that should be in there, then it's going to have a board in it, and every board will have 3 rows, and every row will have 3 squares. Okay, so now we are ready to actually start designing our React app. So now let's actually start building this app. So first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to your working folder, and you're going to want to create a React app. And for this project, we're just going to make it in JavaScript. And so what you can do is you can type npx create React app, and I'm going to call this one demo. So yeah, so you just click that, and then it should install it for you. It's making it, installing everything. And I also have my actual original Tic Tac Toe project. So it's installing everything. It's going to take a little while. And what we're going to actually do first is we're going to just make all of the components and display them. And I'm going to show you like how to display it. And what you first want to do is just have a non-functional program, but you want to have all your components done and you want to have them all visible. So we're probably not going to have states or anything. We're just going to literally make what we showed in the picture after this is done, because that'll ensure that we have like the right layout. And I'm going to show you how to actually like some tricks you can use to make sure your components are like the right size and all that kind of stuff once this is done. It looks like it's almost done. So, okay. So initializing Git repository, doing all this kind of stuff. All right. And we are also going to get rid of a bunch of stuff that we don't really need. Okay, so here it is, our demo. And we are going to get rid of a bunch of stuff that we don't really need. And let's just take a look at some of our files here and like what we have. It's actually in the source. Here it is. So we don't need tests. So we're just going to toss that. We don't need web vitals. We don't need this test. Okay. We don't need any of this CSS. We're just going to use, we can use app CSS, I guess it's fine. Actually, I think what I will do is I will rename this to styles, and then I will just import it, and I'll show you where to do that. So we don't need this one. We will rename this to app.jsx. And so in this index, you see how it's importing here. We are actually going to just import styles CSS instead. And what should happen here is, because this is like our main entry point into our project, if we just import the styles here, we don't need any of this, it will be passed down into every single component. So we don't need to like import it in every single one, and we'll see that in the future. So I think for the most part, I mean, we can get rid of more stuff, but I think for the most part, this is good. And let's take a look at our package.json just to see what we have here. So you can start your project by doing React script starts. You can build it, you can test it, or you can eject it. I don't think they have a dev, but that's fine. Yeah, I think we are good there. So now let's start building our app. So we don't need any of this. And we can also go to our HTML file somewhere in here. Here it is. And we can rename some of this. So let's call this Tic Tac Toe. We don't, whatever. We'll leave the rest of it. It's fine. Okay. And let's actually go and start building our app now. I think we should be good. We don't need a class name here. We don't need a logo. Okay. So well, first thing, what you're going to want to do is, like I said, we are going to use use state in here, and we are going to want to also import actual React to be able to do React. So we're going to import those. We're going to import React and use state from React. We're going to use it later. It's going to give us a warning, but that's fine. Okay, now essentially what we need to do in our app, like I said, we're not going to have our states yet. All we want to do is make a board. And so that's what we're going to do here. So we are going to actually change this to const app. Goes like this. You can use function if you want to. It's the same thing. Missing initializer. Oh, right. There we go. It's basically the same thing as a function. So now what you're going to want to do is you're going to actually display the board, right? So what we want to do there is we want to just display a board like so. But the problem is we haven't actually made our board yet, so it's going to give us a problem. I think actually what you need to do is, I think this should be fine. Or is it this way? We'll figure that out once we actually import it. It might be this way. For some reason, or actually it might be this way. Okay. I don't know why it's not letting me do that. We'll figure that out. Actually, let's do the board first, and let's make all the other stuff. So we need to make a board.jsx. We need to make a row.jsx, and we need to make a square.jsx. Yeah. Okay. And now I think you should be able to type. I think it's like RFC. And then if you hit tab, yeah, so it's like kind of a nice thing to have. I think you might need to have an extension for this, but essentially if you type in RFC tab, it will create like the default template for you. And so we want to have export const though instead of default function, but you can totally do that as well. Yeah, so we want something like this. And for now, I guess in our square, let's just write an X, right? We don't have any props or anything. So this is good for now. So we imported React. We don't really need use state. We don't for now. We'll just leave it like this. Similarly for the row, let's do kind of the same thing. So we want to have a row. As far as to display, let's just display 3 squares, but we also need to import square. So we need to import square, and I think you can just do that. So I think it's like this is the format for it. Let's see if it says something. Maybe the other way. Was it the other way? Yeah, there we go. Okay, I always forget those. Okay, so there we go. So right now we're just going to hard code in 3 squares, but we will later do a map. And there we go. And so we need to kind of do the same thing for the row. We exported. Now for the board, we're going to do a similar thing where we are going to actually, we can just copy this and we can change what we need. So we need to get the row here instead from row. And so this needs to be the board. And we are just going to hard code in 3 rows for now. So we're going to have 3 rows that have 3 squares. And now export board. And now here we're going to import the board, right? So essentially, you want to have your components all in different files, and you want to import the components you're going to be using. So it's going to be board from board, right? Or you can literally do just this. I believe. I guess you can't. Okay. Something like this. And we're just going to display it here. So this is the format. There we go. Okay. So now we're not using useState yet, but that's fine. So essentially, in our app, we want to display a board. In our board, we want to display 3 rows. In our rows, we want to display a square. And in a square, we just want to display an X. Totally fine. Now what we want to do is we want to actually have CSS for these things to actually, because right now it's not going to show anything, right? And also in our app, we also want to display like a header. So we can just have like an H1 or something for now that's just going to say like, we can't get winner yet or something. Something like that, right? So we have an H1 board, pretty straightforward. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to actually have classes for these things. So we can just give a class name to this div, and we can say class name square. Makes sense, right? So square equals. Don't remember if you need, I guess you don't. Okay. Wasn't sure if you needed double quotes or single quotes for class names. Like I said, my CSS is not the best. Okay, so for the row, same thing. Class name row. For the board, probably same thing. Class name board. Whoops. Board. And we don't need, I think for this H1, I mean, we probably want a class name, but it's fine for now. So I think we should be good. And let's actually try to see what we have so far, right? So we can just do npm run build, I believe. It will build it. Missing, I think, let's see what the command is here. Let's see, missing script build. I might need to do like an npm install first, too. And I might need to actually, I might be in the wrong folder is actually what it is. Yes, I think I need to go into the demo here, and then I should be able to do it. I think it should install fine. So it creates an optimized production build, and we can hit npm start to actually have it work. And there it goes. And so right now, we're not really going to see our containers, and we might have an error. So it looks like we have some errors. Can't resolve app.css. And export default was not found in board. So let's take a look at some of those. So we are importing app CSS, which is not necessary anymore. We should just be able to use standard CSS. And where's export default? Oh, let's pull that up again. Export default import as board was not found in board. Possible exports board in app. Let's take a look. Did we write the wrong name or something? Oh yeah, we need to probably do this. Because you're essentially, we didn't export like an entire file, we exported something like that. Let's try this. I think we have to probably run build again. Okay, start. I wonder if I can actually do npm run dev. I think it won't work, yeah. But I think it does have hot reloading to begin with, which is nice. So I think if I do make changes, it will actually persist. Okay, so this is pretty much what we have. We don't really have class names, so we do have our 9 squares, but we actually need to make something that looks like a grid, right? So that's what we're going to do first. So essentially, for the app, we probably do want to have a class name here as well, because what you're going to want to have, if we go back to our picture over here, is we have an app and it needs to have a header, a board, and a button. So we're just going to like display flex this stuff. So we have the header, the board, and the button down below. So let's do that. So we can start with that. We can make an app. Like I said, my CSS is awful, so see how this goes. Display flex. And then we want to have it column. And then we want to justify center. And in future videos, I'll start using like Tailwind and TypeScript and stuff. But for this one, I just wanted to kind of demo how to make a React project. And then we can align item center. And let's just give it a height and a width for now. So we'll just say height is like 1,000 pixels, see how that looks. And width, 1,000 pixels. We're not super concerned with like making it work on like iPhones or whatever. We're just trying to make a basic app in a browser. Okay, now for the board. Our board needs to have 3 rows, right? So essentially we need to have like row, if we look at our picture again, our board layout needs to be row, row, row. So it needs to have 3 rows, and each row needs to be in a separate row, and there are no columns, right? It's only 1 column. So let's do that. So we're gonna have a board component, and we're gonna use a grid for this one. So we're gonna display grid. And essentially we wanna have 3 rows. So it's going to be grid, template, rows. And if you want to just have like some rows that you can preset, you can actually say 3, and then there needs to be like 1 FR is how you do it for the rows. So essentially you're saying 3 rows that fill it up. And then you need to have a height. So we'll just say height's like 500 and width 500. And our rows are basically a grid again, right? Each row has 3 columns, so we need to do kind of the same thing for the rows. We need to say row, display grid, and then the same kind of thing, but now with columns. Repeat 3, 1 FR. And we don't need to give it a height or anything because it's just going to fill up the grid. And then finally for the square, I think for now, what we really want to do is give it an outline so it's visible. So we can just, I guess we could have stuff in it. So we could like display flex. We are going to have some things in it. So I will make a format for now, but I'll get into that later. So we are going to like display flex and align and justify. We're just going to like center everything in it, align item center, yada, yada, yada. And then what we need to do is we can text align also center because we're going to have text in it. And we actually want to give it a border or an outline. So we're going to say border 1 pixel solid black because we want to have, oh yeah, I forgot the actual trick that I wanted to show. So the trick that you want to use to see like how your components look like is you can actually give this border to everything. And so if we just do this for everything, then we can really see, I guess for this, this might be a little weird, but essentially for something like your app, it would make a lot of sense because you want to see like how much space your app actually takes up. Let's take a look. So here we can see like our app is over here. For the board, it makes a little bit less sense to make these because our squares will already have an outline. But now you can see like how much space your app takes up. So if you actually did have components that didn't have like a Tic Tac Toe board, but you had components in each other, it's really good to give everything a border to start out, and then you can delete it. Because you could see like this is the app, and you can literally just write like in your div like app board and so on, and you can get a nice visualization by using these borders. So I would recommend that. But for now we don't need that because we just, like I said, our squares actually show everything there. Okay, so now if we take a look, so essentially we have something, it just has X's. And it doesn't really do anything for now, right? It has no functionality, but we have the layout that we want. We also do want a button, but we'll add the button later. But right now we're good. Now we need to start passing states and need to figure out how everything's going. So we can go to the next part there. Okay, so let's figure out what states we want and where to put them and things like that. So what we want, like I said, if we go back actually to our picture, in our app, we want a state that is an array of the value of each square and what the next click should provide, x or 0, and a function to do that. So let's start having all those in our app here. So we're going to want to have states for squares and set squares, and the way to do this is you just have squares and set squares, and we're going to use a use state. And the way this basically works, if you aren't familiar with it, is squares will contain our squares, and then we need to use function set squares to actually change that. And then useState takes a default value, so we are actually going to give it a default value. And here you could give it one of two things. You can either give it a array of 9 squares, but in our case, since we use rows and columns to make it a little bit easier, we're going to make a 2-dimensional array. So a 3x3 array, so we're going to say array 3. We're going to fill it with null, and then we are going to actually map every single one of those to another function that essentially makes another 3-item array. So every item in the array will be another 3-item array. So this is how you do it. You can't make a, or you could hard code, I guess. Yeah, you could definitely hard code a 3x3 array, which would be, there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but essentially this is one of the ways. So it takes a function, and we'll do the same thing again. Array 3. Fill null. Because if you try to just do like a 3x3 array, like if you do array fill and then another array fill, I think what ends up happening is once you change one of the values, all of them get changed, and we don't want that. We want them to be individual. So essentially we're saying, let's make an array of 3 null elements, and let's take every single one of those null elements, and instead of having that null element, let's just return another array that's array 3 of null. So now we have a 3x3 array set with nulls, which is what we want, because initially we have nulls, and then later on we can put in x's and circles. Now we want to have another state, right? That's going to be, is it an x or a circle? So we can call this like isX, set isX, same kind of format. And we are going to default it to x, right? Because x goes first, except for, we'll just use a Boolean. So true will be x and false will be circle. And so now we actually need to make a function that does these things. And so remember, the function is going to take a row and a column, and it's going to update that exact place in our squares to that. So we can just say const, we'll call it click square. It will take a row and a column, and it will return. So what we actually need to check, right, in our Tic Tac Toe functionality, what we want is if something's already an X or a circle, we don't want that to be changed. So we can check for that. So we can say if squares row column does not equal null, and in this case it'll just be truthy, so you can literally leave it like this. If this is not null, then we can just return right away, right? Because if it's not null, like if it's an X or a circle or whatever, or you could write it like this if this makes more sense to you, like this is totally fine as well. So we're essentially saying, like, if it's not an empty square, we don't want to override our old stuff. So now what we actually want to do is, so in React, they recommend not modifying squares directly. You actually want to make a copy of squares, and then you want to modify that, and then you want to set squares to that. So to make a copy, there's a bunch of ways we can do it, but we're just going to use JSON parse, JSON stringify. You could also make a copy, but because this is a 2D array, you can't do something like this, right? So yeah, I would probably do that. Maybe that does work actually for a 2D array, but I know this one works for sure, so this is the format I'm going to prefer, but you can just do whatever format you want to make a copy. So we're going to say copy squares equals JSON parse. And essentially what this does is it turns your array into a string and then makes an object out of it, so it essentially makes a deep copy. So we can do this. Let's see what we have is the problem. This should be squares. So essentially we make a copy of that array. Now we need to actually change it into a X or a circle. And so the way we're going to do that is pretty straightforward. We're just going to check for this being true, question mark. So if this is true, we want to make it an X. So let's just say copy squares row column equals X, right? Otherwise, we want to make it a circle. And because I have it a Boolean, I do it this way. If you have it a string, you can just put it in directly. Like that would work as well. So this is all like preference for implementation. Now we want to actually change the states. So we want to change this set is X. So if it was true, meaning it was X, now we want to make it false. And if it was false, meaning it was circle, we want to make it true. So in that case, we can just, because it's a Boolean, we can just inverse it. And then we want to actually set our squares as well to this new copy that we made. So now we have a function that actually, like, when you click on a square, it will update the value in the array, but we need to actually pass all this down, right? For the winner, we're not going to worry about that yet, but for the board, we actually need to pass that down into it. And so let's take a look what we're passing down into the board to remind ourselves. So we need to pass a function to check for the winner. We'll do that later on. Actually, we don't need to pass that down, but we do need to pass squares and set square. So let's do that. So it's going to be board, and we need to pass down some props. So we're going to pass down squares. So we can just say, if you want to pass down a prop, you can just say squares, and then this is squares. And then you also want to pass down one more thing, right? You want to actually pass down the set squares function. Oh, and this is this needs to be at the end. So now we're going to have it like this. So there we go. So we want to pass down squares, and we also want to pass down the actual click square function. And so we can call that like handle click. And we will just pass down this function. So click square. And if you want to pass down something that's like a JavaScript or something like that, you need to pass it down in these curly braces when you write in an actual like HTML type thing, right? So React will know this is like this is some kind of JavaScript. It's not just like the name of a div or something. So if I did like this would give you an error. So essentially, we're passing down this function in a prop called handle click, and we're passing down squares in squares. And now, anytime these get re-rendered, the board will get re-rendered, which is what we want, right? Like if one of the x's changes to a circle or whatever, we want the board to re-render. Okay. So now we have the squares in this board, and that's fine. And now we actually are going to go and modify the board. So for the board, we do have 3 hard-coded rows, but we don't really want to hard-code stuff. We actually want to do map. I think it's like better. And there's 2 ways of doing this. You can either map directly in here, or you can create it first. I'm going to create it first, but it's personal preference, and there's upsides and downsides to both. Maybe because in this one, there are not a lot of rows you can hard code directly, but either one is fine. So I'm going to actually create rows here. And this doesn't need to be a state because this is based on the squares. So whenever something is based on, oh, I forgot one more thing actually. So we actually do need to import these props. So we're going to import these props, and we're going to import handle click. And you could import props, or you could just destructure directly here. So now we have access to squares and handle click, because when we make the board, we actually pass these down, right? We pass down squares and handle click. So in the board, we have access to those. So now for the rows, we're going to actually map squares here. And a map can take 2 things, right? It takes a value, and it can take an index. And the index is optional. So that one is whatever you want. But essentially, it takes a value, it takes an index. And now we need to actually do the map. So we're going to make a function that will do the map. So this function will return a row. And what are the things we need for the row? So we do need to pass down the squares, right? But we also need to pass down some other stuff, essentially. So for the squares for the row, remember our squares are a 3x3 matrix, right? So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, something like this. So we only need to pass down like just the row we care about, and that would be this row here, right? So when you do a map from squares, it will take every single element in the squares array, and the elements in the squares array, this is the first one, second one, third one, because this is a 2D array, right? This is a, it actually looks like this. 2D array. Okay. And so yeah, so we need to pass down the row, or the squares for that row, which is just row. We also need to pass down a key here because we're going to have multiple rows, so you want to pass down a key, and we're just going to use the index in this case for the key. Now, if you were actually modifying these rows and moving them around and stuff, you wouldn't want to use a key because a key is kind of like a distinct thing, letting React know where it is. So if you are going to like flip them and do some other stuff, you're probably going to want to have actually unique value, some kind of hashing thing. But in our case, we're not going to like flip our rows or anything, so we're just going to pass down a key. Yeah, and then we also need to pass down the actual index of that row, right? We need to know for every row what this row index, so we can just say row, and that's going to be the index in the array. And then finally, we need to pass down this handle click function again. So we need to prop drill that down. And I believe that's it for the row. I wonder if you can actually do this. I think when I tried this before, it didn't work, but let's find out. Oh, it does work. Cool. So we could do that for the board as well, or for the app. So we can just have it close here. Okay, there we go. And so now essentially we are, so if you take a look at the board again, we are making an array of rows, and each row will have an array of the squares for that row, right? It'll be a one-dimensional array now, it'll have a key, and it will have the actual row value that we need to pass down into the square. So then in the square, we can pass the actual coordinates of that square. And now, if you want to actually show all the rows, what you need to do is you need to do it like this, and then this will essentially display every single row in this rows array, which are all JSX components. Okay. So now we have the rows. Now we need to go into the rows, and we need to kind of do the same thing for the squares, essentially. So we can copy this code and go into the rows. Change this a little bit, obviously, so maybe we can call this like squares or something. This will be, something else. I think actually we are using squares, so we need to call it something else, like boxes or something, whatever you want. And then we actually need to pass these. So we are going to change this a little bit. So we do need to actually get these elements into the row that we actually care about. So if we go back to the row, actually this shouldn't be. Yeah. This should be in the row. This shouldn't be here. It should be in the row. Yeah, like this. Okay. So we are going to need to like take these things from the board. So if we take a look, we're passing down squares, which we need, and we have the row, and we have the handle click. So we need all these things. So it's going to be squares, row, handle click. There we go. Now we have boxes. So we're going to we're going to map these things, right? And so what's this going to be now? So this is not going to be row. This is going to be the squares. Like this is going to be the actual values of them. So it's going to be squares, and then we can have like whatever value we want here. So we can just have like square or something is going to be, so this should be like value, really. So this should be value. And then we have a key, same thing. We have a row, which should just be the row. And then we also want to have the column, and this is going to be the index in this case. And then we have the same handle click. And we need to actually close this, which is the problem we're getting, I think. So, let's see here. Square is not defined. Did I import? Oh, it should be square. Okay. So there we have it. We have a square. It has a square in it, a prop square, a key, a row, a column, and a handle click. And that should be fine. We map squares. Yeah, I think this is all good. Now we can actually do the same thing here where we have square like this. Totally fine. Actually, it shouldn't be square. It should be boxes, right? So there we go. So we have our row done. Now we have to go down into our square. And what are the props we're getting? So we can probably just like copy paste these and then change this around a little bit. So it's going to be square. We don't need the key. We want the row. We want the column. We want the handle click. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we need this. Okay, so there we go. So this is all our props for the square. So now what we want to do is we want to actually display our stuff. So instead of displaying this, let's just display some other stuff just to make it easier to debug. So instead of this, let's actually display a string that's going to have like the row. So we can just say like row, and it's going to be the row. And then we can have the column, which will have the column, and then maybe like value or something. And then that will be the square itself. So something like that, right? Now we could actually display everything. And we do also want to have an OnClick functionality here. So once it's clicked, we want to... So the other thing you could do is for a div, you can actually give a div OnClick. So we can give it OnClick. And essentially now we need to call handle click. And we need to call it, we're not passing it down anymore, we're calling it with the row and the column. And then that should take care of, and I think when you call something, you have to give it like this format. You can't just write handle click. So I think this is the format you want. And so yeah, essentially in our square, it will have class name square, it will have OnClick. When you're actually invoking, you want to make a function. You don't want to just say handle click. Because what happens is when this renders, if you just have handle click, I think it'll like infinite render. And so we're just going to show the row, the column, and the square just to make sure our values are correct. And let's actually run that and see what happens. See if we have some errors or anything. Okay, so we are getting something. It's printing square though, which is not what we wanted. So let's go back. Oh, right. So we need to have this. So let's go back. Okay. So now we our formatting is a little weird, which is whatever. But as you can see, this does work. It is interesting why our stuff is a little weird like this. So we will check that. But this does seem to be working, right? We can't click on anything else. And if we reset it, let's just check the rows and the values. Actually, this seems to be correct. So what we want to do is make sure it's actually a square, right? So let's go back and take a look. Yeah, we actually want it to be a grid with like, I don't know where these are coming from. And we'll take a look at that and let's see. So we have this. We have our, oh, that's the boxes. Now we found that one. There we go. Okay, perfect. So now we do have like what we want. And we're just going to leave this for display purposes. So now we have this, but we still don't have a winner, right? Like we're not checking for a winner really. We can just display. So we actually do need to check for a winner. And so let's build that functionality next. So essentially what we need to do for check for a winner is every time if we go back to our picture, we decided to check for a winner in the app, right? So to check for the winner, what you need to actually do, because this relies on the squares, every time the squares get changed, you need to check for the winner. So it shouldn't be like a state because it relies on a change in the squares. And so every time they get changed, you need to check for winner. And how would you check for a winner? So you can hard code a bunch of stuff, but essentially all you have to do is you just have to check the rows and the columns, right? For them all being the same value. So essentially you just check like, okay, is there a 1 all the same values, or a 2 all the same values, or a 3 all the same value? Same thing for the columns. And then if you do find one of those, then you have to actually, do have to return or like set the value, right? Pretty much. So you'd set the value and then you're essentially done. But you also do have to check for tie, because let's say this whole thing fills up, you do have to check for the tie. So that's the other thing you have to make sure you do. So we're going to set up that functionality next. So we're going to make a function here called check for winner. So it's going to be const check for winner. And it's not going to take anything because it's just going to rely on every re-render. So we're going to check the rows and the columns. So we can just check like for let I equals 0, I is less than 3, right? There's only 3 rows here and 3 columns. Check the rows and the columns. We also have to check the diagonals. Forgot about that one. So we need to actually also check that these squares not only are all the same, but they need to also not be null. So let's do that, right? So we're going to check if squares, and this is going to be for the row first, I0 is not null, and so we can just leave it as truthy. Now we just have to check that the entire row is equal. So if squares I0 equals squares I1, and squares, so this is kind of like the same, there's two of these essentially. So if 0 equals 1 and 1 equals 2, that means this whole row is the same. That means we would want to return whatever value that is, so we can just return squares I0. So that's going to check the row. Now we need to do kind of the same thing for the column. So we're just going to copy paste and change some stuff around. So instead of I0, it needs to be 0i. And same thing, 0i, 1i, 2i. Oh, this should be 1i. Double check this actually. Copying code is not the best idea usually. So if 0i is 0i, and 1 is 2, yeah, it looks good to me. Now we can return any one of these. Fine. So now we also need to actually check the diagonals. So let's do that next. So after this for loop, let's just check the diagonals. And this is going to be similar. So we can just copy one of these and just check for the diagonals. So if you think about it, if we go back to the picture, for this leftmost diagonal, it's 0, 0, 1, 1, and 2, 2. So we can just like hard code check for those values. So if squares 0, 0, and 0, 0 equals 1, 1, and 2, 2. And obviously there might be like some more efficient ways, but that's not the biggest concern in this thing. So that's going to be the left diagonal. And then we can check the right diagonal kind of similarly. So this should be 0, 2, if 0, 2 equals 1, 1, and if 1, 1 equals 2, 0. That's the other diagonal, then we can return that one. Okay, so now we checked every diagonal, but we also do have to check if there's actually a null value, right? Essentially, like we actually have to check there. And so the way we need to do that is we're actually going to make a copy, because essentially we need to look for a null value anywhere in here. And you could do it, you could probably like fit the logic in here, but it's a little bit harder. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to make a copy of the squares and then flatten it out and just look for a null value. So we can just do const copy squares like we did last time, equals same kind of JSON, JSON parse, JSON stringify. Like I said, there might be a more efficient method for this one, but this works. So JSON stringify our squares. And then we are basically just going to check if it has a null value. So const has null. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to flatten it out. And now it's going to be a single one-dimensional array. Now we can just check for sum. And sum basically just checks if there's any value with this. So we can just take value, and it's going to be value equals null. So if there is a null value, that means that we can still keep, like, there is no winner yet, right? But if there is no value, then it's a tie. So what we could do here is, because we are returning strings, we can just check for has null. So we can just return has null. So if has null is true, that means there is no tie. So we can return like none or something as a string. Otherwise, we can return a tie. Like that'd be totally fine. Okay. So now our function is fine, but we need to actually invoke it. And also, the other thing we need to do that I forgot is we need to actually have this variable, like we need to actually have a variable that calls this function that we can check. So what we're going to do here is we're actually going to have a winner equals check for winner. And now we can use this variable to do other stuff, right? So instead of saying this, we can get no winner yet, we can actually just now actually have some kind of logic in here, right? So we can say like winner equals, like we can check for all kinds of things, right? Essentially. So we can say like winner equals, let's just say none. Then we can display one thing, right? So we can display like there is no winner. And otherwise, winner equals none. This is screwed up. Yeah, so it's like this. There is no winner. And then if there is a winner, let's display the winner as like the winner is something, right? So the winner is, and then we can have the winner here. And obviously, yeah, it will say like the winner is tie, but that's whatever. It doesn't really matter. So something like that. So let's say we have a header with some logic, right? So if there is no winner, we're going to say there is no winner. Otherwise, the winner is none. You can add more logic to display a tie if you want to, but this is fine for our purposes. So essentially now what will happen is every time there is a re-render, it will check for the winner, and then it will appropriately write stuff, right? But also, if you think about it, we need to actually figure out, like, if there's a winner, like if we go back to our board, right? So if we go back to our board here, if there's a winner, like let's just redo, okay, this is whatever. Like let's say there's a winner, right? So it's like X circle, X circle, X. So there's a winner now. So we shouldn't allow our user to input any more stuff. And right now we don't have that, right? So when they click the square, we can also check for the winner. And then if there is a winner, then we can actually not do anything. So let's actually move click square down here. I don't think it really matters because I think this will still like all load. So I don't think it'll affect it, because essentially what will happen is this will run first, and then it will just pass down click square. It's not actually going to get invoked, but let's just do it this way because this is like the logic we're doing. So essentially what we need to do is if there's a winner, so we can say or winner does not equal none, right? There is a winner. Then we should probably return, because we don't want the user to click on more stuff if there's a winner. So yeah, and let's kind of see what happens here. I think I may have screwed up some stuff, but let's just see. So winner equals none. You want to display this. There is no winner, otherwise you display this. Yeah, I don't know if this format works, but we'll test some stuff out and see what happens. So let's go to our actual app. The winner is... Oh, that's a problem, right? I don't know why it's doing this. So let's take a look at that. So the winner is winner. And where's winner? Check for winner. It's actually console log winner here, just to see like what it's actually printing. Let's go back and we can inspect. Let's see. We actually probably, yeah, so for some reason it's literally giving us like code, which doesn't really make sense. So let's actually, instead of doing that, let's do this first, but I expect it to be kind of similar. So let's go back. Yeah, so you can see it's literally writing as a function instead of, like it's writing this whole function, which is definitely interesting. But let's take a look here. So check for winner, return, return, return. Oh, right. It's because we didn't actually call it. There we go. So let's go back. Okay, there we go. Winner none. So let's see what happens here. Let's see if we have some implementation. Okay, so you can see like it says the winner is X. And let's try for circle. X circle. Oh, whoops. Okay. There we go. And let's just put a X here. It's kind of hard to read. So that one works. And then now let's do the tie. Let's actually get rid of these now, so since we know it's fine. We can actually get rid of these just to stop making it so clunky. So instead of having all this, we can just only display the square. Right. Okay. So now let's see what happens. So we have X. Let's try to get it to be a tie. It's actually, so let's just do this. Something. This. Hopefully we get a tie. It's hard to get a tie. Okay, definitely don't want to go there. Next here. Nice. So it all works out So we pretty much have all our functionality, but we are still missing that button, that reset button, right? That we need to be displaying. And the reset button needs to actually like reset the board. So that's what we're going to focus on next. And let's go back to our picture and figure out how we would do that. So essentially this button to play again should only be displayed if the winner, if there is a winner, right? Like if it's a tie or someone wins, it should have this button, but it shouldn't be displayed otherwise. Now you can obviously make a tic-tac-toe to just reset whenever you want, but essentially this button should only be displayed if there is a winner and the functionality of the button, like how do we reset the board? Let's think about that. So we want to reset our state. So ideally what we want to do is we want to take all our squares and we want to make them null again. And then what we also want to do is for this state of what next click should always be X, right? X should always go first, or at least in our implementation. So let's do that. So we need to conditionally render a button when there is a winner. And then our button should invoke some function that resets the squares. So let's do that. So here we can conditionally render a button. And we can give it a class name and stuff if we wanted to, so we can call it like button. And we can say like reset game, maybe. And it needs to have an OnClick functionality. And we can give this reset squares or reset game or something. And we're gonna have to write that obviously, but yeah. So now we can write reset game wherever, like here or something. And also another thing is you want to think about where you write your functions. So all of these functions actually rely on the state, right? But if you had a function that didn't rely on the state, you would want to write it outside of your component. So that's another thing, not to clutter up your component. Because like this check for winner does rely on the state, and this click square also relies on it. And the reset is obviously also going to rely on it. So we need to do that. So we're going to write in here. So we can just say const reset game. It's going to not take anything, and it's just going to reset the board, right? So we're just going to say, we're going to set the X. So we're going to set is X to true. I think that's the starting state we have. And we also want to, so we want to set the is X to true. We also want to actually, oh yeah, we want to reset these squares, right? So we can pretty much make this thing again, and we can just say like const square copy or something, or copy squares, right, that we have equals this new array, and we can set the squares to that, right? So essentially making a new array of all null and reset it. And now what should happen is, theoretically, so when this reset game happens, this component will re-render, the winner will say false, and now this button should not display. Now we don't really have it, conditionally rendered yet, so that's what we're gonna focus on next. So essentially what we wanna have is we wanna have this button conditionally rendered, and this can be done a bunch of different ways, but the thing we are going to do is we are actually just gonna check for the winner. So we could say winner, question mark, and then if it's none, then we don't want to display this button, so we can just display nothing here. I think we can literally display like this. Otherwise, we display the button. And let's see what errors we get and stuff. Let's see here. Identifier expected. Actually, oh right, this is the wrong way. So let's see, expression. I think you can literally just have a div here. Yeah, okay. So essentially what we're saying is if the winner is none, then we want to just have a blank div, right? Like nothing here. Otherwise, we can, I'm pretty sure you can literally have nothing. So we can literally say like, we can probably have an if statement. So I think the better way to writing this would actually be like this. Yeah, because we don't want to have like a blank div. We want to actually have the button if the winner is, so it's actually, in this case, it shouldn't be none, right? So if the winner is not none, then we display the button. Otherwise, this will be false, and then we wouldn't, like, both of these have to be true to display this thing. So let's look at our logic. And see if it works. So we have X. And there we go. We have a reset button. I mean, we can style it a little bit, I guess, right? I guess is like the last part for this. So not going to be great at styling once again, but let's see what happens. So this button is called, let's see, where am I? Oh yeah, it's going to be called button. Okay. So let's go to the styles. So let's make the button, and I guess what do we want for the button? So we probably want to have like, if we look at our picture, if we go back, you see how there's probably a margin here. We can make it a color. We can give it a radius, and we can make it like a little bit bigger and stuff like that. So let's do some of that. So we can have a margin top. Let's make it like 20 pixels or something. Then we can give it a width, like, you know, 200 pixels. And let's give it a height of 50 pixels. And maybe we can, let's see what that looks like. So this looks okay. Maybe we can make the font a little bigger. We can also like color it a little bit, and we can give it like a border radius or something. All that seems pretty reasonable. So we can say font size, 20 pixels, background color, just say red, and let's give the actual color white. Let's see what that looks like for our button. So that looks pretty reasonable. So now I guess, so we have this background color. Now maybe we can like give it a border radius or something, and then that could be the end. So we can say border. I think buttons do have a default border, so we can just make it one pixel solid. Just make it red. We don't need like a black thing. Let's see what that looks like. And then we can have a border radius. Always nice to add a border radius, and we'll say like 10% or something. See what that looks like. Okay, let's see. So now we have this. Yeah, so we have a button, reset game, and now we can reset it. So we have all our functionality essentially. And yeah, and we can also check for the tie, but I think it should be fine. But let's just see. So we have X here. Maybe we can also have like our text a little bit bigger for our X's and O's. That would probably be a good idea, right? Because it's a little small right now. So let's do that as well. So I think this should be like font or something. Size, make it like 40 pixels, or who knows. There we go. So now it's a little bigger, easier to see. Let's just try to get a tie here. Yeah. And so this all does work. If there's a winner, it shows the winner. If there's a tie, it shows a tie. And so we got all our functionality. So just for the recap, now for a Tic Tac Toe, obviously this is like, small project, not much to do. But you do want to do this for bigger stuff, because once you get complex projects, you do want to actually draw out your component hierarchy. Then you want to actually display the components with no functionality, and then you want to add functionality to kind of complete it. And then obviously you want to add like testing and all these other things. But yeah, this is like what you would use to make a React project. So hopefully you liked it, and if you did like it, please like the video and sub to the channel. And I will be doing more of these for like Redux or some bigger stuff, or maybe a whole server. And that's going to be, for that, it's going to be a lot more important to show a component hierarchy, because I think it's definitely helpful to have people understand the actual flow instead of just like, oh, here's all these components. Now you can just copy paste everything I'm doing, and you're not really understanding like the thought process behind it. So as a developer, I think it is good to like plan this out ahead and think about it. So yeah, hopefully you like this video, and I will be making more of these in the future, and let me know what you think about it in the comments. So thanks for watching.